Hello, welcome. Already see folks saying hello in the chat, so thanks everyone. Good to see everybody. And I see we have folks from all over this evening, so thanks for joining from all over the place, and give everybody a minute to just get settled in. For those of you who don't know me already or hasn't been to one of our webinars in our ongoing series, I'm Litsa. I'm one of the co-founders of What's Your Grief? I'm a clinical social worker, grief therapist. And I imagine if you are here, it is because you're already connected with What's Your Grief in some way. But this is part of our webinars series that really actually started in our Griever Hub, which is our membership community. And we previously offered a lot of just general webinars, and we've kind of merged that all into one. So we're offering these as monthly webinars that are available for people to tune in for, even if you're not a member of our Griever Hub, but that are then available ongoing in our Griever Hub, and where we can also have just follow-up discussion and things like that in there. Also, a lot of the themes that we cover for these webinars are themes that have just been coming up in conversation in the Griever Hub, and things that just kind of feel top of mind for whatever reason. And this concept of paradoxes, I think is one that resonates really deeply with a lot of people, and also is a little bit abstract. And so it came up recently in, I say recently, a couple months ago, when we were kind of putting together our calendar for the next few months. And I thought, is this too abstract for us to do a webinar about? But I don't think it is. I hope that it won't be too abstract. I think it is actually a concept, like so many things in grief, where it's difficult sometimes to find the words for it. There isn't always necessarily some checklist of like, okay, how do you cope with this experience? But sometimes it can be helpful just to create space to honor and acknowledge the experience that's happening, to do some self-reflection work around what space sometimes these contradictions and paradoxes and shifts that happen in our life after loss, what space they're occupying for us. And then thinking about how we can treat ourselves a little bit more kindly in the face of sometimes these paradoxes and contradictions that we struggle with, because sometimes they're associated with feelings of discomfort, feelings of guilt and shame for even feeling the contradictions, and a lot of other layers of feeling. So that's kind of what we're gonna dig into this evening. I think I probably don't need to spell out an exact agenda, because this isn't going to be too long. We're not spending the whole day together or anything, but I did want everybody to have a sense of some of the things that we're going to talk about. So I want to talk about just understanding the idea of these paradoxes, why this is a theme that we see so often in grief. This kind of two or more seemingly opposing or contradictory experiences. I said emotions here, not only just emotions, but oftentimes emotions, or thoughts or beliefs or feelings about ourselves and identity. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of dialectical thinking and what dialectical thinking is, what the research shows us about how important it is in life in general, but especially during the most difficult times in life, devastating grief and trauma, and why dialectical thinking can be so important. And then where self-compassion and post-traumatic growth come in when we are thinking specifically about contradictions and paradoxes. So we're going to going to cover all of that. And I'm going to end with some just reflection prompts to leave everybody with, to really kind of just take this and think about how it applies to you. For those who are members in our Griever Hub, we'll use the prompts that I'm going to share at the end for our next community writing workshop or session, I should say, and that in that space. So please know if you don't want to do that self-reflection just on your own and you want to save it to kind of come together with other people and do some writing on Zoom, that will be what we'll do with those prompts. So what is a paradox in grief? It is, I think, connected to this idea that we so rarely are ever in life, and especially in grief, thinking or feeling just one thing at the same time. We are often feeling a huge surge of so many different emotions, thoughts, experiences. And many times these are things that we feel like are in conflict with one another, or that feel difficult to make sense of or put in the kind of logic or order that we want to. And this happens in life in general all the time, right? We know that we can love someone dearly and fiercely and more than almost anyone else in the world and feel unbelievable anger at them that is coursing through our entire body. And those two things don't necessarily take away from one another. And yet the way that our logical brain often wants to put order to things is to somehow say it's one or the other, it's this or that. And the reality, of course, is that it is much more layered than that. In grief, we feel we feel and hear just constant paradoxes from people. Please feel free, if you joined this evening because you've already been thinking about some of the paradoxes that come up for you, or these many things at the same time, please, of course, feel free to share some of those in the chat. But some of the things that we hear from people that cause them maybe a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of distress or self-judgment. I just threw a few common ones on here. Strength and vulnerability, like feeling like, wow, I have survived this event that I never imagined I could have survived. And that has allowed me to, in some ways, feel incredibly strong or proud of myself or capable. And in other ways, I feel more vulnerable, more terrified, more aware that the world is uh, a frightening place where things can turn in an instant. And that I somehow feel all of that at once. So I'm left feeling this combination. Gratitude and loss, feeling like losing someone or something can make us feel deeply more grateful for what we still have, the people who are still here, the time we still have, our own health, all of these other things, while simultaneously feeling cheated or feeling unable to appreciate those things, feeling maybe rationally grateful for them, but emotionally unable to connect with them. At the same time, feeling joy and jealousy, right? Feeling seeing other people and being able to feel genuine joy that they still have a partner, a parent, a child, a sibling, a best friend, that they are have these things, and yet simultaneously feeling pangs of jealousy or resentment or other sorts of even anger for what has been taken from us. Feeling this combination of passion and apathy. Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm seeing that there is Sorry, I'm seeing that people are putting some notes in the chat. I hope people have been able to get started. It should be able to, you should, even if you're with a different email, if you've just entered your email address, it should start automatically. It will be available if it took a little while to get in. The replay will be available at this link for 7 days. So, we just started, but just so everybody knows. And I see some people, sharing here that, right, joy followed by sadness, feeling so many different uh complex feelings, and sometimes it's even the emotions and early grief. We've talked many times before about how people will sometimes feel paradox in their feeling of relief, if you watched a loved one suffer, if you were experiencing your own suffering and feeling so much pain for a person to be gone, and yet simultaneously feeling relief, which sometimes we associate as being a positive emotion, and feeling complexity in that, which can happen in so many different situations. So we have so many different circumstances. This is like a small scratching the surface. Um, and oftentimes, why we feel discomfort with these things is because we have been, not necessarily explicitly, but sometimes we have been led to think that we're supposed to choose one truth, that we're supposed to either be feeling positive things or negative things, good or bad, right or wrong. Uh, when that isn't the case, when we feel like either we've internalized this idea that I need to figure out what I'm feeling and why, or that other people aren't going to be understanding of this mix of emotion that we're feeling, of these contradictory things, of this struggle that we're having, potentially, maybe because, as I mentioned, I think I glossed over this last one, right? Passion and apathy, where we can maybe suddenly now feel like we realize that life is short and fragile, and we feel like we want to savor the moments we have left, and yet we struggle to do anything or have any motivation to do that, and to try to explain to another person who hasn't experienced that, or um, if we're struggling with the words, it can be difficult, and we feel like we need to suppress pieces of it, or we may feel like there is shame for the fact that I might recognize things like wanting to be able to feel gratitude for the people who are still here, yet I struggle to keep commitments and make plans because I have no energy in my grief, or I struggle with being able to kind of savor life despite now feeling like maybe I theoretically appreciate it more than ever. We can feel guilt and shame and really feel like we're we're bad or wrong for these things, and get stuck in a lot of this either or thinking about things. And sometimes it is the the fact that we have these beliefs that one thing must always cancel the other out, right? If I'm feeling a little bit of jealousy or resentment, or I'm feeling bitterness because of what I've lost alongside happiness for another person, we believe that somehow, my happiness must not be full or true or authentic, or it's been canceled out by these other feelings. And we sometimes struggle with the idea that we can truly hold both of these truths, and they can sit with with us at the same time. And so this is really what dialectical thinking is about. Dialectical thinking comes out of philosophy, but has been adopted in many different areas of psychology and mental health. And it's really about trying to practice as a skill our ability to hold to seemingly contradictory or opposing truths at the same time, and recognize that oftentimes we can bring and hold those things together. And this it doesn't just apply to grief, right? As we said, that the loving someone deeply and being deeply angry with them, um, being that there are situations where I can be right and someone who disagrees with me can also be right. We can have our own unique experiences of things, and both can be true. um, Knowing that our identity can change and I can still be me, right? Like I can recognize that I am not the person I was before my loss or trauma or series of losses. I can look at who I am now and who I am then and feel like that this is two different people, and yet see that as still me in some way. um, Being able to recognize this idea that feelings don't cancel each other out. And dialectical thinking, it's associated with being able to have a flexibility in a world that often forces us to into areas that are mixed emotions, that are gray areas, that are not as black and white as our brains often want them to be. Part of why dialectical thinking can be a challenge is that one of the ways the human brain loves to organize the world is to categorize things. Part of how we move through the world more quickly is through our brain's ability to quickly kind of see and identify and throw things into categories. And most of the time, that is a really helpful adaptive function of our brain. But when it comes to some of these things that exist, where we're feeling so many different things at once, it can be something that causes confusion or self judgment, or doesn't give us space for these things. So, one of the ways that mental health has adopted the idea of dialectical thinking is in helping people to notice when they may be putting things into sort of these either or categories and thinking it has to be one or it has to be the other, or struggling to make sense of both, and just challenging us to live in the both and to be able to um, sit in this place of understanding what can be uncomfortable, which is that it isn't an either or, it is a both and. There isn't always one right answer. Many truths can coexist and many paths can coexist. And I think in grief, one of the things that we know can be terrifying and debilitating is the future that we imagined is no longer the life that we're living. It's not the path that we're on. And oftentimes, when there's so much uncertainty about the future, people can find themselves lost in trying to find or make the right decision, right? Choose the right path of what comes next. What do I do now? How do I handle this? And both and thinking encourages us to pull back from that and say, there's not one right answer, there's not one right path, there's not one way to grieve and figure out what it means to move forward. There are many different paths, there are many different kind of realities that we can move forward in, and that we're going to figure out how to make that reality a life worth living, hopefully, right, in our grief. But that oftentimes when we get so focused on the idea that there is a right answer, a right path, a right way to grieve, that we then get stuck and sometimes paralyzed in trying to figure out what that path is. That people are either good or bad. And I think when we look at grief support and the people around us, sometimes people who have been wonderful friends, incredible people who are family that we know, love, and care about us, really get support wrong. they put their foot in their mouths, they say the wrong thing, they do things that are hurtful, they pull back because they're scared, they don't know what to say or how to support us. And so then they disappear. And all of a sudden, we're faced with this difficult experience of trying to figure out, what does it mean that someone who I have loved and cared about and who has loved and cared about me and supported me has suddenly done these things that feel really hurtful. And this is a place where oftentimes our brain jumps very quickly to recategorizing. Oh, I thought this was a good friend. Now I realize they're a bad friend. We love to kind of move in those all or nothings sometimes. And dialectical thinking recognizes this idea that we can hold two things together, that people can be good and flawed, that good people can do bad and harmful things. And that doesn't mean that they're necessarily beyond hope or beyond friendship. And it allows us this flexibility for exploration. Oftentimes I'll see, I think in social media land where the world gets flattened, and we hear kind of a lot of one-dimensional things. We'll hear people often say, oh, this person, they finally showed their true colors. Like, somebody will talk about a situation, somebody will respond, and clearly one person's trying to explain the complexity of a person who has been a good friend, but who's now done something hurtful. And you'll get those like, oh, well, now you're seeing their true colors, as though this one event now somehow defines who they are as a person. And I often think that's because we struggle with sitting with the reality that good people can do hurtful things, and we struggle to know how to make sense of that and sit with that. That we think we should only be feeling one feeling at a time. And of course that, the both and says we're always feeling many feelings at once, and they're not always contradictory, right? That there's many times there's just layers of feelings that we're feeling. And when we think about our emotions, that it can be helpful to label them, not just by distilling it down to the one thing that we're feeling in a moment, but starting to recognize and label the many different emotions that may be coming up in a particular moment, knowing that life after loss is often bittersweet, and that even the most joyous, wonderful moments also sometimes end up being the ones where we feel the deepest pain and awareness of absence of a person. So, what dialectical behavioral therapy is one form of therapy that uses the idea of dialectics a lot. Talks about this idea of walking the middle path, where we are kind of holding multiple things at the same time, where we can be both accepting the reality of who we are as people who are changed and impacted by our grief, or accepting the reality of the world that we're living in this current moment, while also working to change things that we're feeling unhappy with about ourselves, not from a place of self-judgment, but from a place of being able to hold to truths of both self-acceptance and desire to change, being able to validate ourselves and who we are, and why life may be incredibly hard, why grief may be incredibly devastating, and also wanting to find areas for growth. And just this fundamental idea that of effort and rest, of finding ways to know that sometimes the work of grief is in fact work, and it is hard, and it is difficult, and it means challenging ourselves to process incredibly hard events and emotions, to give people feedback when they're letting us down, to push ourselves to do things that are uncomfortable, and also that we need rest, that part of grieving is turning inward to be able to tend to ourselves, to be able to figure out what it means to live in the world after loss, and that rest on a body that has been where our nervous system, our stress response system has been so our attachment system has been so deeply devastated by this loss, that rest is a critical part of what we need as we figure out how to move forward. And it's not that we're feeling any of these things half, or compromising, kind of in a 50-50 way, but that we're feeling and exploring both of these things, both sides of each of these things fully, and then figuring out what it means to have balance with those things. And so when we look at paradoxes, in grief, and when we look at why we should even bother creating space and practicing dialectical thinking and reflecting on what some of these paradoxes are for us, I think one of the compelling reasons, beyond just the fact that we know that when people are practiced at dialectical thinking, it helps them with flexibility in the world, um, is that there's a concept called post-traumatic growth, which some of you have probably heard of, and some of you may not. Post-traumatic stress and post-traumatic stress disorder gets a lot of hype, and we hear about that side of things, but I don't think we hear as often about post-traumatic growth. And post-traumatic growth is a well-researched phenomenon, that it looks at positive psychological change that comes from adversity, not despite it. And it's not resilience, which is sort of going back to our baseline or being able to kind of survive something unscathed and bounced back from it. But post-traumatic growth is something that they look at as growth that comes through the struggle of living after a devastating and traumatic event, with with this process of often paradoxes at the core. And so, what post traumatic growth research finds is not that every person who experiences a loss or a trauma is going to experience post traumatic growth, but that many people who struggle with some of these paradoxes and with trying to figure out how to live in the world after a devastating trauma, that it is actually through the struggle of living with this that they find areas of growth. And so it often includes things like greater appreciation of life, new strengths, closer relationships, shifts in priorities. But as you can imagine, with each of these is oftentimes another side where people feel exactly the opposite. There's that greater appreciation for life, but oftentimes people articulating that feeling of of feeling unable to function, feeling hypervigilance, feeling threatened by the world, feeling lack of motivation, lack of fatigue, or lots of fatigue, lack of ability to do those sorts of things. New strengths, but those new strengths coming with those vulnerabilities, coming because we were forced to face things that we never thought we would have to face, or that we never imagined would be as hard as they were. And that creates a sense of vulnerability in the world. Closer relationships, but that oftentimes when people when the research looks at post-traumatic growth, about relationships, people say, my list of friends became much shorter, but the strength and depth and closeness of those relationships became much stronger. So people often identify that trauma, there were relationships that didn't survive that that grief or that trauma, but that the ones that did felt closer. So there's this paradox of feeling both abandoned by some people, or that an uncertainty about certain friendships and relationships while feeling others were strengthened. And a shift in priorities, sometimes feeling like a seeing things more clearly, understanding what's important to a person became easier after a devastating loss. And yeah, on the other side of that, sometimes feeling a lot of pain and confusion and difficult feelings about where they spent their time or energy in the past, or feeling like they're not able to connect with other people since their priorities have shifted or connected. So when we hear about post-traumatic growth, I think the name of it makes it sound like it's some rosy, wonderful thing, like we've, found some sort of growth that makes everything all better after a devastating event. And nothing could be further from the truth. The reality is that post-traumatic growth, and what the research shows us, is that it is this growth that is happening deeply within the struggle, within the paradox, within kind of that uncertain place we're trying to live in, that is between many different categories. And it is, for people who experience it, many of them don't experience less emotional distress. They're having just as much emotional distress. They don't think that it's a sign that the trauma was good or worth it. Most people say, I would trade any of this growth that I've identified back if I could have my loved one back or have not gone through this devastating event. It's not the same as resilience or optimism. It's certainly not a universal experience. But that it is something that does sometimes emerge for people within these paradoxes. And as I mentioned, these are some of the common ones that the research identifies, of feeling more vulnerable and stronger, the deeper relationships. I live more in the present, and yet grieve the future that I imagined. And being able to sort of identify some of these things, these paradoxes, often can help us to see and label growth that we may have missed otherwise, because the quote unquote negative side of the paradox pulls us away from creating space to acknowledge the other piece, or because sometimes we fear that if we acknowledge any type of growth or any type of positive, piece on the other side of a paradox, that we somehow are saying that we're grateful that this happened, when we can identify growth without necessarily feeling grateful. We might feel grateful for the growth, but we're not grateful for what happened. We're not grateful for what brought us here. We wouldn't say we would trade it. I'm not going to get into a whole bunch about how post-traumatic growth happens, but I know every time we talk about post-traumatic growth, I think some people question, like, well, who does it? Who experiences it? Why some people? Why not other people? There's a lot that we could say about that. A lot of researchers in positive psychology have worked very hard to try to understand that, to try to better help support people after losses. But we know that when people are able to talk or write, to find places of safe disclosure, safe self-disclosure, to be witnessed and to explore and talk about these many different feelings and emotions and experiences and thoughts that are part of grief, that it actually increases the likelihood of experiencing of post-traumatic growth. So being able to look for places, whether it is with friends, whether it is groups, whether it's online, whether it's, and again, this was found in research, it could be through talking, it could be through writing, it could be through other forms of creative expression, but finding ways to be able to express and be witnessed and give a space to explore really helped people to identify some of this growth. And social connection did the same thing. It supported post-traumatic growth. And then active cognitive processes. And what they mean by that is when we go back and we examine our experiences and we really try to look at all sides of it. So oftentimes, because our brain loves to categorize things, we become very focused on the either or. We become very focused on one aspect of how our identity has changed, on how our life has changed. We struggle to sometimes take a step back and see the big picture and see all the different aspects. And so when we lean into some of these paradoxes, one of the things that it does is it pushes us to identify all of the different directions, all the different aspects, even if they seem confusing or contradictory, or they bring up a little bit of shame for us. It encourages us to be able to really see and label them all. So if we're doing this, if you want to kind of get into the practice of thinking about living with paradox, but also of being able to kind of put words to it, or to start to think about what it means for you. Starting with noticing the different extremes in our thinking. And then by extremes, it doesn't have to necessarily be at the furthest end of the emotional spectrum, but just those things that sometimes do feel contradictory to one another. Sometimes we'll think about that feeling of like, if you walk outside on a really, really cold day, but it's like really crisp and the sun is shining, and it's like, you can be like, wow, I feel this like warm sun on my face, and yet I'm freezing at the same time. Being able to sort of notice in grief how many moments we are walking through the world feeling those sorts of different unusual extremes, and that because grief sometimes creates a new clarity in different areas of our lives, that we can feel like there are things that we feel more clearly, while yet also we feel like this haze and brain fog, and we're kind of struggling to even figure out what we're going to do to survive the rest of the week, and yet somehow may also feel more connected to certain values or priorities, or a drive to to be able to connect to something we always wanted to do, and now time feels precious, so we want to do it. So it can be this big mix, and just noticing and starting to label and name those multiple truths, and to do it without any sort of judgment, to be able to, and this is hard, right? We're oftentimes always have that inner dialogue that's going on, that is commentating about how we're feeling, and what we're thinking, and is it good, is it bad, is it right, is it wrong, am I supposed to be feeling this way, is this, am I grieving right? And so really trying to pull back and just name that this is what is coming up, and name it without too much judgment, to the best of your ability. One thing that can be helpful is to imagine another person who you love and care about, if they were feeling or thinking or experiencing the same thing, thinking about how we would maybe help to name those experiences for them without judgment, whereas we struggle with ourselves. And then sitting in the discomfort of that practice of just sitting with the discomfort of the contradiction, noticing it, noticing maybe those feelings of judgment that are coming up or of questioning what we're feeling, and sitting with that rather than trying to rush through it or avoid it or make sense of it or put logic to it. Just kind of doing some sitting with it. And coming back to the reminders that feel useful for you. If one that I think is commonly helpful for people is reminding that feelings don't cancel each other out, that when we're feeling, that joy for someone and jealousy, or we're feeling that deep relief after loss, along with that deep and devastating pain, that we can feel all of those things together. So maybe it's that reminder. Maybe it's another reminder that for you feels more important. But being able to just kind of use those reminders or mantras when you're sitting with these things, if you can. And and then allowing for growth without forcing it. I think, I introduced post-traumatic growth not because it is somehow better, your grief is better or worse if you have experienced post-traumatic growth or any type of growth. It's not like grief is not it's not a self-improvement project. The goal of grief is not to somehow find growth or be better for it. And that being said, when growth does exist, when growth has happened, it can help us if we notice it, if we create space for it, if we allow for it to be there. And if we don't feel guilt for it, which is, I think, one of the things that's really important to identify, is that sometimes we feel like it is a betrayal to the person that we've lost, or it somehow minimizes the impact of our grief to make space for growth or to acknowledge growth that has happened. So just, allowing for it, while also not forcing it or not thinking that it is a problem if growth isn't something that has happened for you, because of course it's not. And I see there's a couple of questions that I want to just come to in the chat before we move on to the next piece. And thank you for people who've been trying to help others troubleshoot in the chat. And I want to just make sure we cover a few of these. So one person asked, what makes a person abandon you after you've suffered the loss of a spouse? This question, right, about how people who've been so important to us can behave in ways that we never would expect. And I think the answer to this question, there's not one single answer. I think there's many different answers depending on the person and the circumstances. And so I could never say for sure. But one thing that I think we know is that people feel extreme discomfort about watching and witnessing the suffering of others. And that is just real. People feel like they have to fix us, right? They want to fix the problem, find a solution. We live in a society and a culture that really suggests that that's what we should be all doing all the time, is taking away pain from ourselves, taking away pain from other people. And often when people feel that they don't know how to take away our pain or what to do for us or how to fix us, they pull back instead of leaning in. Sometimes it is because people don't have the bandwidth. They have their own suffering. They have their own struggles. At another time, they might have been the most incredible support for us. And unfortunately, at the time that we needed them, they had other things that were, consuming them. And that's just a reality. I think sometimes people make that unfortunate mistake of thinking that what we need is space. And sometimes we as grievers inadvertently reinforce that, right? Like if I have no energy to do anything and my friend reaches out 17 times and I say no every time, sometimes it makes sense that they're like, whew, she must not want my support or, need space. And so sometimes it is really that people we in grief are not always the easiest because we both want support and don't want support at the same time. Speaking of paradoxes and dialectical thinking, that sometimes we really crave that. We feel a lot of anger and resentment at feeling ghosted or not supported. And also, we struggle to reach out for support. We struggle to give feedback. We struggle to be able to kind of start to explore the world of resources and support for us. So that all comes together. I think there's so many different things. I wish I could tell you. And I think one other thing that sometimes comes up is that after loss, we sometimes become people's worst fear, right? Like when we've lost someone, it's a reminder of the reality that bad things happen. They happen all the time. They happen to people that we know, that they happen to you, someone that person knows. And some people, for various reasons, that is really hard for them. So that I don't know. There's countless reasons. I'm sure other people could come up with many, many, many more. And so I think that is incredibly, incredibly difficult. And yeah, Janice, I completely agree. It can be exhausting, that paradox of wanting to be around friends and then immediately not wanting to be with friends, how exhausting that can be. And again, thinking about when we start to name this and sit with it and understand it, one of the things that can be helpful and come to it from a place of non-judgment in ourselves is that sometimes we can be more honest with people about this. We can say, hey, I'm really excited to see you. I'm really grateful that you want to get together. And a thing I know about myself in my grief is that sometimes I get somewhere and it's just too much. And I really need to go. I really, kind of can't stick it out. And so I want to be really upfront and honest and like label and describe that to you so that we can just talk about it. And sometimes that releases a pressure valve, because sometimes what we're feeling in those situations is a little bit of like dread and claustrophobia that we can't leave. Like, oh gosh, now that I'm here, like I'm stuck, I'm trapped. And that can, for some of us, create a stress and anxiety response that then makes the situation even harder and more exhausting. So sometimes just labeling in advance, saying like, hey, I'm gonna come by, but maybe only for 20 minutes, those things that allow us to feel like we've created outs in social situations. Sometimes knowing we have the out actually really, really helps. And when we feel confident about those feeling two things at the same time, knowing that we don't have to judge ourselves, that it's not a bad thing. That's normal. Sometimes it gets easier to talk about and tell people. If we're feeling self-judgment about the fact that we want to see people, and then as soon as we see them, we want to leave again, and we're annoyed by, the fact that they're talking about something that now feels frivolous to you or whatever it is. If we're feeling a lot of self-judgment about that and being really self-critical about our emotions, it makes it even harder. But if we can normalize for ourselves, like, this is part of it, this is part of grief, this is part of what it is feeling this mess of different emotions. It's okay. I don't have to judge myself for it. I can kind of create a space to be honest about it. That sometimes it helps us to get through those different situations. So this is yeah, there was, let's see, one other, I was trying to think there was another. Oh, someone asked a question about what is meaning making. Oh, that's a big one. So meaning making, which I think was um on that slide about how do we what are some of the things that sort of support post-traumatic growth. And one of them is meaning making. And meaning making, I think a lot of times when we hear the word meaning, we think of like capital M meaning, and it can be really off-putting sometimes. in grief because it's like, how do I make meaning out of the worst thing that has ever happened to me? What does that even mean? What does that look like? I really like, and I have if you follow our website and our articles, you may have seen me write this quote before. I really love Pauline Boss, the ambiguous grief researcher. She has been writing and researching and working with grievers for 50 years. And she says something is meaningful when it is comprehensible to the person who's having the experience. And I think that that is in grief, oftentimes a really helpful way to think about it because it is how are we making sense of our own story? How are we making sense of this thing that has happened that feels like it doesn't make sense, that it doesn't fit into the life that we imagined we would be living. So making meaning sometimes is about feeling like for some people, they're like, oh, I made meaning out of my loss by doing, it caused me to pivot in my career. It caused me to start a foundation. Like these big meaning things. But for many people, meaning making starts to happen when we just somehow start to put together our own story and figure out where this loss fits within this life that we're living now. And I think that is often sometimes the path to little m meaning gets us to a bigger M meaning. But that is often a place to start. And a lot of approaches in narrative therapy really look at this idea of how do we start making sense of our own story? How do we start telling our own story? I think one of the reasons that we see that people talking or writing or creatively expressing their own story is something that supports post-traumatic growth is because it helps to start making sense of our own story. We start to construct this narrative and try to figure out what this loss means in the greater story of the life that we're going to continue to live. So I know that's not necessarily the most helpful answer, but I think it can be one that feels a little bit more manageable than capital M meaning. Yeah, and being able, yeah, absolutely, to talk about the loss, to find spaces can be so important. If you, Daniel, I appreciate what you said about you can see the relief on people's faces if you pretend to be cheerful and happy. I think that is very much others struggle to witness suffering, and sometimes it's important to recognize that we, before our loss, or maybe still even after, struggle with that too. When we see someone suffering, to just be able to sit and be present with that, it is really difficult because we want to fix it. And sometimes it can help other people around us, when we let them know we're not looking to them to fix us or to cheer us up. Sometimes I think people will feel like if we're not putting on that cheerful, happy face, they feel like it's their responsibility to try to say the right thing or cheer us up or make sure that we have a really good time at this event because we're so down and sad. And being able to say, like, just being together, just you being able to be here with me, even though I'm not happy and cheerful, like that's what's important. I don't need you to fix it or cheer me up. I just need you to be able to be here with me through this. And it can be a reminder to people that their job isn't to fix it. So as we just kind of wrap things up, I mentioned in the beginning self-compassion. And I think self-compassion is something that is such a critical part of the grief experience that we don't talk about enough, because oftentimes all that criticism that we feel from other people of, them wanting us to be better, or our pressure that we put on ourselves, it can turn into a lot of negative beliefs about ourselves, and negative self-talk. And self-compassion is such an important piece of just being able to sit from a place of non-judgment, and find this full acceptance of who you are and what you feel in this moment, while also caring about yourself enough to make changes where you want to make changes as you move forward in your loss. And again, being able to hold both of those things at the same time, that I can fully accept where I am in this moment in my life, in my grief, with the emotions that I feel. And I can also practice a love and care for myself that says, I don't want to be in this same place forever, and that might mean finding support. That might mean doing certain things differently, or pushing myself out of my comfort zone. And that I can hold both of these at the same time. For those who are in the Griever Hub, our book club book this month is one of Kristen Neff's books. And some of you know we love Kristen Neff. She is a self-compassion researcher who has done so much amazing work talking about how do you learn self-compassion if it doesn't come naturally to you. And in her early work, she talked about practicing self-kindness and practicing mindfulness, as well as really common humanity, being able to recognize that often the things we're beating ourselves up for are the things that all humans experience and struggle with, and also are going through. And yet we're so quick to beat ourselves up when we would be incredibly kind to a friend or somebody in our support group who was going through the exact same thing or struggling with the exact same thing. So she really built this idea of how do we treat ourselves with this type of self-compassion. And then in her later work, she started to talk more about this other side of self-compassion, which she said that type of where we build through kindness, self-kindness and mindfulness and common humanity, it was this tender self-compassion where we really fully accept ourselves with this kindness and care. But she then really developed this further to say to be in balance. And again, she acknowledges that it can feel a little bit like a paradox itself, this type of self-compassion, that we also sometimes have to have not just tender self-compassion, but what she calls fierce self-compassion. And that's when we have to take action to alleviate our own suffering in some way. So maybe that is because we need to protect ourselves by drawing boundaries, by giving people feedback, by saying no, or by saying what you said or did really hurt my feelings, and trying to do that even though that it's hard, to recognize what our needs are and really sometimes take action to get those needs met, and to find ways to motivate ourselves to grow or to change or to step outside of our comfort zone if that's what we need in our healing, if we're recognizing that our that's what we need for our suffering. So she says, we need to be able to both accept ourselves for exactly who we are and exactly where we are, while also sometimes recognizing we have to care about ourselves enough to take action, and that's a form of self-compassion too, that holds its own paradox within it. So as I promised, I'm going to share some reflection prompts here with everyone. If you want to, after this evening, just to do some writing and reflection on your own, and you can obviously write about this concept without using prompts, but if you want some of these prompts, feel free. Like I said, the recording will be up for 7 days. So if you want to come back to it, you can, or you can snap a quick picture of the screen. If you're in the hub, the recording will be up indefinitely. But as I said, we'll use these prompts in our next community writing session for people who come to those. And if you want to just have that as time on your calendar to do some writing. But the prompts, in case anybody is just listening, I'll go ahead and read them through. Recall a moment in grief where two truths didn't just coexist, but they seemed to depend on each other. What was the connection between them for you? When has grief made you feel more yourself and less yourself at the exact same time? Write about a way that grief has made you both more compassionate and less patient, or less compassionate. Has loss ever made you feel freer and more bound at the same time? Describe that. What has the awareness of life's fragility made you, when has the awareness of life's fragility made you want to live more fully and also retreat from life? Think of something that you've gained through grief that you would gladly give back if you could. How do you live with both truths of that? And these are obviously just a few to get you started, but you could write and explore this in any way that feels like it would be helpful for you. Oh yeah, Ellen, I appreciate what you shared about identity, right? That identity issues. I think of feeling that paradox of like, I am both Vince's girlfriend and single and alone, right? Like those two things. How do we make sense of that? Yeah, Charlotte, absolutely. You can feel free to share the link to anybody who you think might find it helpful. It'll be up for 7 days. Like I said, and yeah, somebody asked about the hub. The link is on there. These webinars are always open every month, even if you're not a member of the hub. If you're on our newsletter list, we always share the links to these in our newsletter. But if you want to join the hub, the information is on the website. It does have a fee, but if cost is a barrier, we have scholarship spots. So please feel free to reach out. But the fee, it's $19 a month. Or if you join for the whole year, it's even less than that. I can't remember, maybe $180 for the whole year. So we try to keep the fees really reasonable for that. And of course, there's tons of articles and podcast episodes and all those things on the website if you're looking for other support between these webinars. And yeah, Ellen, you can just go to the same link where you joined, and the replay will be available at the exact same link. Oh, Kathleen, I'm glad that it has been helpful and that What's Your Grief has been helpful. And yeah, I appreciate all of the kind words. And for anybody looking for info on the hub, I'll put that link in the chat. And if there's anything else that anyone needs, you're welcome to reach out at whatsyourgrief@gmail.com. I'll put that's our email. And in the chat, Mary is who covers that email mostly, is off for the rest of the week, but she'll be back on Monday. So sit tight if you don't hear back right away. Thanks so much, everybody, and hope to see you at something else in the future.